Welcome to The Charging Point, conversations that move us forward. In this episode, we welcome DC counselor Miss Chelsea Burkham. Chelsea is a graduate of the class of 2015. She's also a lifer. She came to us in the first grade. Chelsea completed her undergraduate degree from Texas Tech in general studies with a concentration in health professions, psychology, human development, and family studies. Chelsea has her master's degree from UT Arlington in social work with a specialization in children and families. Chelsea's work history prior to coming to DC was with the foster agency in Dallas, as well as the state CPS offices in Rockwall and Dallas counties as a caseworker. Chelsea's also married to a DC graduate, Hayden Burkham, also the class of 2015. Hayden's sister, her sister-in-law, is also a graduate of Dallas Christian, class of 2019. Yeah. And Chelsea's little sister, Chloe, is a graduate of the class of 2027. And we're going to have Chelsea's daughter, Harley, joining us in K3 in the fall. And she will be a graduate in the class of 2041. Yep. Welcome, Ms. Burkham, to our podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about some content relevant to our students growing up in a digital environment. In the book, Teens, Social Media, and Image-Based Abuse, we get content and research that's very troubling as it relates to the environment our kids are growing up in. As you know, our kids grow up in a ubiquitous environment with networks, followers, social media platforms. Cell phones now become something that's an appendage for them, a digital appendage. It's part of their everyday existence, and they're being exposed to this content at younger ages. In this episode in particular, we're going to talk about the themes of how images are used as it relates to students' well-being, their mental health, and content that's online that never really goes away. We also want to give parents practical advice on things that they can do to help their students at younger ages as they're being introduced to content online, whether it's through gaming platforms or social media, as well as some takeaways that we think could be very important in conversations with your kids at home. It's important to mention we are not experts in this field as it relates to some of the content we're talking about. We are leaning on experts and their content. But we do want to share expertise as it relates to counseling, Christian school experiences, and information that's relevant to things here at Dallas Christian and in the broader scope of education and students. With that being said, let's dive in. So, Ms. Burkham, the reality is students are getting their cell phones at younger ages. Research tells us as young as third grade, students are getting their first cell phone. Students are being introduced to social media platforms, whether it's Instagram, Snapchat, at a much earlier age as well, as early as fourth grade. In the book, Teens, Social Media, and Image-Based Abuse, the writers tell us that students are getting exposed to illicit images as early as 9 and 10 years old. That's incredibly troubling. And as parents, as we think about how in the world can we protect our students, give us some advice real quick. I know this is something that you've had to deal with in terms of just helping students through from a counseling standpoint, even some parents. Real quick, before we dive into the research, let's talk about some practical things as it relates to what our kids are being exposed to and some of the advice that you might have.
Yeah, so, you're completely right that the research shows us that their kids are getting phones as young as third and fourth grade, which is no longer just cell phones at this point anymore. It is the internet and the world at their fingertips at an age where they are not necessarily mentally capable of making decisions about the world for themselves. We still do everything for them at that point. We're still cooking dinner. We're still driving them around, and they now have all of those opportunities at their fingertips. So when we talk about creating a space, allowing them to have these phones, if that is your choice. If you are allowing these phones at certain ages, there's definitely got to be restrictions. We guide them through every other aspect of life and teach them the way they should go, the way they should treat their friends. But we've also got to guide them on how to use our phones and our internet properly. So when it comes to some tips that I have, it would be definitely put those parent locks on your phone. Teach kids from a young age what a phone should be used for, how to communicate properly, as well as not necessarily saying, no, this, but sometimes I think kids really understand and relate to the why. Why is this not safe for me? Why does my mom tell me that I'm not allowed on these gaming platforms or these social media platforms at a young age? instead of just saying, no, not yet. As we know, sometimes when we give kids no's, they say yes themselves and give us the pushback. So I think when you are trying to create from a younger age to foster an environment where they do things properly and more responsibly, that giving them the why, as well as being a parent, being involved, can help them navigate a situation a little bit better.
Great advice. One of the things that we're going to come back to towards the end of the podcast is specific wisdom around some of these social media platforms that are troubling. So we've talked about sort of the universal, your child now has a phone.
Now what? Yeah.
Now what do we do? But let's drill down in terms of some of the troubling statistics that we're reading, the research that we're gaining on direct feedback from students of all ages. And so what I want to share is some information, again, not unique to this particular book. This is now information that's becoming mainstream in the area of education and certainly in the area of child development. And some of this is very troubling. First thing I want to talk about is that students now, for the first time in really human history, are exposed to greater networks of strangers in unfiltered ways. Now, this is a brand new phenomenon as it relates to previous generations. It was really unheard of for me growing up, for sure. Obviously, we were surrounded by strangers, but strangers never had open access to my attention span and to my heart and mind as they do now. And those strangers come in the form of followers and friends. And something happened about 15 years ago when it comes to social media platforms and adolescence. We think that students just now wanted to become influencers now because it's popular on TikTok. They were actually doing this on Instagram 10, 15 years ago. And so the idea of having a following of 1,000 people, 1,500 people, 5,000 people was actually something happening 10 years ago on student Instagram accounts. I remember conversations with parents whose daughters were in high level cheer, and in particular having very open conversations with dads about, I'm not sure how to handle the fact that my 15-year-old daughter has 10,000 followers on her Instagram account.
Right. It seems innocent to have a phone and be able to communicate and have those relationships with their friends. But there's so much more that they are experiencing outside of their friends. Something
happens in the mind of a teenager as it relates to their following. And so one of the things that comes up in the research and the neuroscience supports this, the social media developers understand the role of dopamine in the brain. Yeah. Something happens when we get new likes and we get new followers and we look at that number and we realize that when we post images or we share our content, that all of a sudden 5,000 people looked at this, or maybe there's been several hundred shares of my content. Something happens in our brain. It's a bit of a hit.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a high that we get with the dopamine. And so it creates this cycle to where we want to keep getting that particular dopamine hit. And not to mention, just through the way status in our culture now looks at that type of thing, there's social capital, and so we feel good about ourselves. Yeah. Our sense of self-esteem is now baked into the idea of what our network looks like, what our followership looks like. And then fast forward to 2026, marketers have realized that we can actually monetize this.
Yeah.
And so teenagers recognize that my content can actually bring about money. Parents recognize that, and that's a whole nother conversation maybe we can get into towards the end. But leading up to the idea of what students are now experiencing that I think is unique to this generation, not only are their networks greater, more vast, they're international, right?
Yeah.
They're also being exposed to content for the first time that is unfettered, without any guideposts. So in the old days of just cable TV, right? Parents would have to monitor what their kids are watching.
There was a passcode.
Or after hours. I don't think we had passcodes. But you always understood that after hours, content came on at a certain time slot. That it was understood that kids were not up watching cable TV, or at least certain paid channels, entertainment channels on TV. That's out the window, right? The idea now that the only filter from one of these strangers in your child's network sending them an image that's illicit, that's inappropriate, the only filter is whatever filter you happen to have on that phone or what that student has on their phone. And the reality is there really isn't a filter for that.
Right.
So that's the problem. And so really, let's talk now and change gears a bit. What happens when a student receives some content? Also, what happens when that student is asked to share content? So one of the things I want to mention, then I want to kind of throw it to you, Chelsea, the idea that some of these behaviors that we're going to talk about has become normalized is something we have to deal with as parents, as a school, but certainly as a culture. And so when I say that this is normalized behavior, in no way, shape, or form am I assigning a value to that. Right, wrong, or indifferent. We may not like that it's normalized. We may certainly all agree that this is very troubling behavior. But the reality is, it's become normal behavior.
Right.
And so when I say it's normal behavior for a 13, 14-year-old boy or girl to be asked very, very quickly in a text conversation with someone maybe they just met or someone they're dating, hey, send me some pictures of yourself, send me some nudes. That is normal behavior now.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what that means in the life and in the mind of a student who for the first time has to navigate this terrain.
So I think going back to kind of your point about having all of these followers and engaging in these likes and seeing all these people that have, seen your content and liked it and interacted with it, to younger kids, and even that dopamine hit is saying, I matter. That this content people like, I matter. So when we're having conversations about children receiving images or being in relationships where these kinds of contexts come up of image or sexual anything comes up with kids, it's, well, I have started a relationship, whether that's a friendship or something like that, that matters. And I want to continue to matter to this person. And the teenage mind is all over the place. It is developing. It is, they forgot their socks one day, but they are adults the next day. Like they are in both ends and they're trying to figure out who they are. And so they're also trying to navigate these relationships and what's important. And when they are starting to have these adult-like reactions to relationships and friendships, they also feel like they're entitled to adult activities. And that's where some of these images and curiosity and I trust you, you trust me kind of things go on. When we talk about the platforms on social media, or let's say Snapchat, for example, when we talk about these platforms that these kids are engaging in, these are their sole communication lines. These are the place where they probably feel safest because things can disappear or whatever, but they also feel the most at risk because they know that this platform is designed for that kind of communication. When we talk about that children are experiencing these images at younger ages, it is because also they have these things at their fingertips at younger ages.
One of the things that comes along with recognizing that they're being exposed to this content at younger ages is what comes with that is trauma. Mm-hmm. And I'm not so sure that we've necessarily taken that as seriously as we should because it's become normalized behavior. Right. We have students who are dealing with trauma because they were sent an image that they never asked to see, never wanted to see, and now they're having to process that. And in particular, the experts are telling us one of the challenges that we have is giving students a platform or at least a voice. How can they share that with their mom and dad? What do they do now? They just received an image. And by the way, I'm sure if we surveyed our students as young as 5th grade and up, the research tells us that as high as 60 to 70% will answer, and that number percentage will go up as they're older, or as the age gets older. They've already been exposed to this. So we're talking about two different things. One is, what do I do as a student? I've got an image. It's an inappropriate image. It's an illicit image. What do I do next? What's your advice for parents, and what's your advice for students?
Yeah, so for students, that line of consent when we are talking about social media and a relationship that we might want, it sometimes becomes gray due to emotional and social pressures. And so when that line isn't absolutely clear, which is difficult, it's hard to be a student. It is hard to be a teenager navigating all of these things with everything else at bay. But when we talk about this, sometimes what we're seeing is, yes, they're sent an image or some sort of message that they necessarily didn't want. But it's uncomfortable to say no, or it's uncomfortable and you don't want to insult the other person if you're wanting this relationship. If it is out of the blue, I mean, yes, that's complete trauma too, but I think there's trauma in trying to figure out, how do I say no? How do I tell this person I'm not comfortable with this? And there's this gray area that we can sit behind a screen, and maybe instead of engaging in the conversation, we're sending pictures of our ceiling. We're sending this, and it's not the direct no, but it's, I'm not comfortable with this at all or yet, or any of those kinds of things. So when you are a student in that situation, my biggest thing is like open conversation between you and a partner, or you and a friend, you and a relationship. When we're talking about peer-to-peer relationships, we do see that they're trying to figure out their communication and how they want to date anyways. And then they're having to add these platforms in as they're growing up of just negative images, negative messaging that is in that sexual context. So my advice to students is to open that communication very early on. If you have a relationship, these are some of the conversations, not necessarily about images or deeper topics between you two, but it's just, what am I okay with? These are my cues. These are my no's, and opening up that communication. So many of these kids are scared to hurt someone else's feelings. And I love that. We teach them kindness. We teach them to be wholehearted. But sometimes when it puts yourself in jeopardy, they're so concerned about still upsetting somebody else on the other side of it. And that's where we see some of this back down and acceptance of these images. And then it's, well, I didn't say no and I like them, or things like that. When we talk about it with parents on that side of it, again, I would open up that communication early on.
How early would you open up that communication?
I mean, your kids watch you from a young age. My daughter repeated things that she saw on a show the other day, and I thought, where did you learn that from? She's 3 years old, and I thought, you are a genius. You came up with this on your own, right? And I was like, no, she learned this. She's living in an environment. She's taking everything in. So how you are starting, and it's never too late to go back and open those doors, but how you are starting communication and openness and conversation with your family matters. And when you're sitting at the dinner table, if we're all sitting on our phones and we're just rushed through life, like one of our alumni families had actually hosted something this fall, I guess, for new families. Her name's Stacy Loescher. And she just reminded everybody that dinner with your family matters. Breakfast with your family matters. Time matters with your family. And kids see that. When they're rushing through, we don't have time for deep conversation. We don't have time for what's appropriate and what's not. And so having those conversations with them, starting at a young age, opening up communication, and also showing them your responses. Is everything going to be a negative response? Everything is going to be a positive response? Or are we somewhere in between? I think there's definitely a happy medium in between that. But when we are only negative response for everything that doesn't go the exact way that we want for our kids, then they see that.
It's a quick way to shut down open communication. So you talked a lot about peer-to-peer in relationships, guidelines. Talk now, what happens when a student who's 11, 12, 13 years old, they're on a gaming platform, or they're on a social media site or on an app, and they receive an image from a stranger. They receive an image that's traumatic for them, for sure. What's the advice for that student? And in particular, how can parents start that conversation with their elementary student that these are some realities? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I would definitely remind them of like what's okay and not okay. How we are treated in life is definitely one of those things. And if we experience something that we don't like, we get the opportunity to say that wasn't okay with me. And so when we're talking about like at a young age, it's reminding this is how you should be treated. These are our no's for our bodies. These are our no's for our emotions. Like we want someone to treat us with respect. And if they don't, how do we navigate that? You can come ask an adult to help you navigate it. Or, maybe we've taught you the skills and things like that. Knowledge is power at that point. Knowledge is power for these kids. If they know this isn't okay, they're going to come tell you, as long as there's not shame regarding telling you. I think for kids at a young age, if they experience something negative on a platform they love, it's going to be swept under the rug because they don't want to lose their gaming system. Right. They don't want mom and dad to take away all of the good things because somebody did something bad. So a lot of times they're going to sweep it under the rug. That's where open communication and just power of embodiment comes into play of, I didn't deserve this. Good.
That's good stuff. One of the things that's brought out in the book, Teen Social Media and Image-Based Abuse, is some gender-specific scenarios that typically hit girls differently than boys. Not that boys are immune to this.
Right.
I want to talk just for a few minutes about girls and the at-risk behaviors for our girls are disproportionately targeted.
Yeah.
It starts out with boys that they know who might want to date them. In the old days, you might have received a handwritten letter with do you want to go out? Yes or no.
Yeah.
That's like ancient. That feels like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't. Now, what we're seeing in many, many settings is boys are doing what's called phishing, and maybe there's a different term now. And so the phishing is, hey, do you send pics?
Yeah.
And it's a very, very direct way of saying, I want to see some images of you, and I want to share some images. And so that's happening. But the other traumatic experiences that are happening for girls in particular, disproportionately more, are specific anatomy pics, specific genitalia pics that boys are sending girls, oftentimes unsolicited.
Yeah.
So that's generating trauma. What do I do with this? This is someone I go to school with. This is someone that I know. This is someone I go to church with. All of a sudden, I have this image on my phone. I could get in trouble if my parents know this image is on my phone. How do I get rid of this image? And to your point earlier, it's a bit challenging because, to your point, if I go and tell my parents, they're going to call so-and-so's parents. It's going to be a whole big thing. And so I'm just not going to talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's where the silence over time creates some problems in the minds of our girls, particularly in the developmental mind, as they're having to deal with, okay, this is just normal. And sadly, that's normalized behavior to where if we're not careful, they will grow up thinking, well, there's nothing wrong with this. I'll just delete it. I'll just move on. And the authors here are very, very clear. There's a mental, cognitive, emotional, spiritual residue that's left when a young lady's treated that way.
Yeah.
What's some of your advice for students and parents recognizing that greater cases of anxiety, depression, eating disorders, other psychosocial issues now manifesting largely because of what it means to live in this digital environment? What's your advice? What are you seeing? What are the things that we need to be thinking about?
The first thing I'm seeing is just a disconnect. Parents will realize something is going on with my teenager, maybe my teenage daughter. Something is going on. They're not themselves. If we're seeing the anxiety and depression, all of a sudden they get to high school and they're anxious. Is it? Or is there something else going on in their lives? It becomes one of those things that because women on a global aspect are targeted a little bit differently than men at a higher rate when it comes to abuse, trafficking, just disproportionate in that way. And that's not necessarily something that we can fix right away, but it's something that as we're raising daughters and raising young girls and raising young boys, that we start to have these conversations about what is okay for them in their life and how to prepare them for the world that they're going to face. So when we have the children that right now are in high school, and we have high school age kids, it is going to be something where you are navigating constantly. Are they depressed about a test? Is there something going on? Are they hormonal at this period? Is it just something that's supposed to be happening? Or is there something more to this? Because there is something that goes along with receiving an image or receiving sexual context that you weren't necessarily comfortable with and just putting it in your body and hiding it because I'm the girl. I'm a little bit lower down maybe in my mind. I'm trying to navigate all of this. And, I can't speak up about this. I don't want to get them in trouble. That goes back to the kindness thing with all the kids. I don't want to get them in trouble. I like them. It's also really uncomfortable and awkward to go to your parents. I mean, we've been teenagers. It is so awkward to go and talk about a deeper part of your life if that deeper part of your life is not already an open topic.
Right.
If you ask your kids at the end of the day, hey, how was school today? And you get the I would definitely advise to let's start going deeper. We can't just ask all of these questions off the bat because sometimes I feel like kids feel like their parents are strangers. They don't understand them at all. So when you open up that conversation from what these girls are experiencing, that little anxiety or that little depression that you are questioning, you might be able to sit down and say, look, I really care about you and I want to know what's going on. And my instinct is, yes, you could be in trouble if something is happening. Kids, you might get in trouble. But that doesn't mean that your parents don't want to help or that you have to navigate all of this alone.
So part of the conversation, helping our students understand there are consequences for sure to our actions and behaviors. That's important.
Yeah.
And it sounds like when we're thinking about having those very open conversations about content, what used to be called the birds and the bees conversation, which was you knew that was the parents' time, whenever that age was, that we're going to talk about sex. We're going to talk about body parts, and probably, I don't want to cast everyone in the same light, but
right.
probably for many parents, that's how do I navigate that? Is there someone else that could just cover that for me? Is there like a science class? Is there like a sex ed class? I think now that we recognize, because of the environment our kids are growing up in, and it is harder for kids to grow up, it's time now to have that very full frontal conversation with our kids. And the age is probably something you need to kind of think through with your own child. But the reality is, it's time to say, and maybe right when you give them the phone, hey, let's talk about some of the content that's out there. And that may actually be a good entree to the conversation on these images that might come across. And then also that, to your point, that gives a great follow-up, right? Yeah. Hey, listen, just want to do a little quick pulse check here. How are things going? Yeah. I'm hearing some statistics out there that 60% of girls are getting unsolicited images. Hey, has anyone ever sent you something like that? Or have you come across something like that online? It opens up the level of conversation to where that conversation becomes a bit normal. Right.
Well, and we have, we can all call it the birds and the bees, but there's actually a different term for it now called sexual ethics. What is right and what is wrong in this sense? So it's not just teaching the awkward anatomy and all of those kinds of things. And the kids are like, I never want to think about this ever again. Like there's shame there sometimes, but when we talk about sexual ethics, what's okay and what's not okay, that opens up a different conversation, right. I think. And I think you're exactly right. Doing a pulse check and saying, hey, I'm hearing about this. Has this happened to you? Because sometimes kids don't know how to say, hey, this happened to me. It's a Tuesday and we've got a soccer game, but I just want to let you know that this has happened to me. And that's just not always there. So, and when we talk about this happening, we can start the conversation back at a younger age when they start to like a boy and all those kinds of things. Like, how are we fostering that relationship there? Mm-hmm. Are we asking, are you happy? Do they treat you okay? Do they make you sad? If they do, what is that? Do you feel like you deserve these things? Like, there is definitely a level of just like a snowball effect in a positive way or a negative way that can happen either way. If you're like, I don't want to hear about your boyfriends, I don't want to hear about your interests, the kids are like, oh, well, this part of my life that now matters to me as even a younger middle school kid is not a topic of conversation that my parents want to hear about.
Right.
So when you take that away, not that you're saying, yes, let's have a boyfriend that we're going to marry at 11, when you're not advertising that, but when you're promoting healthy conversation, then it's going to kind of promote along the way, and they're going to learn this is a safe space. I actually met with a kid the other day who didn't share a lot with their families. There was shame there. There was some things that they just felt like their parents would definitely not be okay with, but they were still doing them. They're teenagers. And we say that as like a catch-all term. It's like, oh, well, they're going to be teenagers. They can handle it. They can do it. But really what that means is that they're trying to navigate the world and they're trying to figure it out. So they are still doing things they know that their parents were not liking. Don't worry, I gave them good advice. But it was one of those things that until a situation that they had turned very bad, they did not want to tell their parents about it.
Right.
They thought, okay, I can handle it. I can experience this. I can feel pressured. I can do all these things because I like this person. And there's no way that my parents would even be happy that I've already been doing this. Until that situation turned into something that was a very strong safety hazard, whenever they were able to call their mom and dad and say, I am in a really bad spot and I need your help. The fact that that kid was able to do that in the first place it opens up a really big level. They could have suppressed those things and it could have been a much worse situation. But they realized at some point along the way, my mom does care about me. My dad does care about me. There's going to be consequences for my actions, but right now I want that safety for myself. It's building some of those encouraging self-beliefs that I didn't deserve this. And from that point on, that negative situation actually opened up the doors of communication between them where they can actually talk about a lot more. And even if it gets a little bit in trouble or is a little disappointing to the parents have a little bit more understanding, just thinking, my kid's going to call me.
Right. I think that's great advice. I also want to just double click on the idea that, again, this is all normalized.
Yes, and normal doesn't mean okay. It means common.
Totally it means common. And so if you're a parent and you're having to walk through some very, challenging situations of just raising kids, and parenting is not for the faint of heart.
No.
right? And so, but I do think it's important for parents to know you're not alone.
No.
This is not a reflection on parenting. This is not a reflection on your child's a bad child. This is just growing up in an environment where these behaviors are very common.
Yeah.
And almost to some extent, they're going to happen statistically, some of these behaviors. And so once we take sort of the shame out of that and recognize this is no different than raising kids in previous generations when smoking was a temptation or vaping's a temptation now, or you pick the vice. It's a bit of a experience that kids are going to have, and many kids are going to experience at some degree, whether it's at home or when they go to college. So being able to kind of come at it from that perspective may actually open the level of communication between parents and kids. We want to de-shame it. One of the things that we spend a lot of time in Dallas Christian when we talk about digital citizenship, and we want to help our students develop, as you pointed out, that expression, sexual ethic, we would say a biblical worldview. We want to attach this to Scripture, and God's Word says an awful lot about our imageness and where we find our value. Our value isn't predicated on how big our social network is, how popular we are. It's not predicated on looks, athleticism. Thankfully, our value is centered squarely on being made in the image of God and that Jesus died for us. And so we recognize that our value is grounded in that. But that's a truth that we want to continue to keep in front of our students because our culture is sharing with them a very different value proposition. And that's really, I think, where we need to be very candid, age appropriately, but be very candid with our students and recognize that, yes, we understand that being a content creator is awesome. There's some great ways in which you can become very, very popular. You can become somewhat of an influencer. You have a great following. Mm-hmm. And maybe along with that comes great responsibility. Yeah. And so by no means are we suggesting that the best parenting advice here is to put your kid in a hole, so to speak, culturally.
No. Yeah.
While we have, and here's the irony, we have decided to take away the cell phones during the school day. That's simply a function of we want them to be able to focus intently on learning and growing. We want to take away the distractions. And we also believe that digital sobriety, so to speak, that detox moment where they can have 8 or 9 hours of digital detox away from all of the notifications, all that's going on in their world. We think that's just healthy for them mentally, healthy for them spiritually. But now, our advice is not to say, hey, raise your kids completely absent and void of technology or of devices or even social media. That's a parenting decision. There's going to be a point in which they're going to be in that world. So I think our best advice, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, our best advice is start young, equip your student.
It's never too late.
Exactly, never too late to go back.
Yeah.
And educate them on the technology, educate them on the realities that's out there in age-appropriate ways, but certainly we're going to say younger is better when it comes to some of these sorts of things. I want to change gears a bit because we talked about some of the challenges growing up as a female in our culture, particularly adolescent female. Our boys have a different set of challenges. Clearly, they're still going to be asked for pictures. They're going to still see pictures. They're going to still send pictures to some extent. That's just, kind of part of growing up, I imagine, in terms of this age, and not even just illicit pictures. I mean, everything is now picture driven. So we've lost, literacy has gone way down, largely because everything is image driven. And in some ways, images can tell more than what text can tell. And so we want to see ourselves online, but we also want to take pictures of ourselves, whether it's athletically or video. We want to share that content. So images are going to happen. That's a big part of communication now. It's a big part of the metaphors attached to images says an awful lot more than words.
Well, and even the I matter part, that I'm putting out something and I matter. I'm in this world and my value is coming from here. And that's where teaching at a young age, and I say young age, I mean, hopefully before you're 50, you realize that not everybody in the world should determine your value. That a social media platform, I think if one day all of these things just disappeared, we would have so many people doing so much self-reflection of figuring out, do I still matter?
And by the way, that's hilarious because that would be a whole nother episode on would someone actually go and do some of the things they're doing if they couldn't take a picture of it and share it online?
Yeah. Did I have breakfast today? Don't know.
That's right.
Don't
And
know.
so that's part of what for boys is one of their temptations, which is behaviors that are inherently dangerous, risky behaviors that they wouldn't normally do if they weren't chasing the likes online, they weren't chasing the capital online. And so for boys, we're seeing behaviors, risky behaviors. We want to capture that, put it online. Somehow or another, somehow or another we think we're cool if we do that. That's even an old term. No one uses that term anymore. But
Kids still think they're cool.
Okay, so those behaviors for boys, but also I want to talk about a very sensitive idea that we're seeing with boys in particular. That's a challenge, and that is the idea of sextortion. There are images that are being shared, and so through AI, through chat bots, through very insidious technologies that are out there, teenage boys are being they're talking to who they think is a female. They think it's someone they met online. Right. This is true for girls as well. And so all of a sudden they think that they're in this relationship. Come to find out, it's not what they think. The person on the other end, it may be someone from another country. And all of a sudden the scam begins. The text messages follow. If you don't send money to X, Y, or Z, I'm going to send these pictures to everyone in your network. Yep. And so we're seeing tragic outcomes from those sorts of situations. Yeah. That's a reality of this environment that's out there and the predatorial behaviors that's hitting really all ages, I imagine, but in particular boys and girls. But boys are now working through this idea of what happens now when I've shared images, and true for girls as well. So there's that component that's happening. And then we get back to the very basic proposition, which is once images are shared, and we're now back to peer-to-peer context. Once images are shared, those images never go away. So that's the first admonition here. But also the follow-up is if you don't keep sending images, then I'm going to do X, Y, or Z. Talk through that piece in terms of the pressure of that, and what does a student do, boy or girl? What do they do when all of a sudden they're now facing my entire world's going to blow up because the video I sent that I'm ashamed of is now going to be sent to my parents, is going to be sent to people at my church, it's going to be shared to everyone in my school. How do we walk alongside a student and help diffuse that and help them understand that suicide is not their option?
Right. So I do think that this comes back to the lack of connection that we're seeing among our teens and our adolescent age, that they're in these digital devices so much that sometimes they're not creating this connection peer-to-peer in person, or struggling in that aspect, so that they are connecting with someone online. Instead, it makes it a little bit easier for them. It takes away some of the challenge and awkwardness. And it also is like, well, this is a person that I trust or has become a figure that I trust. And when we talk about that, maybe girls not as much online, that boys are maybe scammed a little bit more in that area, thinking it may be a female or just like another bro that is, playing games with them. And they're like, oh, I've got connection. I may not always find that at school, or sometimes I may not always have that at home, but I've got connection with my headset on and with my gaming device or keyboard or whatever they're using. But with girls, we did talk about that there's already kind of this different pressure and disproportionism, that the girls are a little bit more targeted or feel more targeted. So they kind of already think that everybody in a way could be out to get them, when the boys not necessarily as much. They are a little bit more macho, you're a man, like all these kinds of things. So they are a little bit more easy to confuse on a gaming platform. Right. Predators know exactly what they're getting at whenever they are seeking out a child, what their weaknesses are, how to get to them, and creating that community, that false sense of community that seems so real to a young boy. In a situation like that, where maybe there is some sextortion coming in, where like we've built this relationship, we've built this connection, you've now trusted me, and guess what? I have flipped the scam on you, and now I'm going to tell everybody. We do see an increase in suicide rates in children below 14, specifically because of these images and these social media platforms and these kinds of experiences that they feel like, I have no way out. I think you and I had previously talked about a younger teenage boy in Oklahoma that had experienced this, and the family was just devastated. They just said, if we only knew and opened up that communication. for anybody, parents, students, anybody listening, if you're stuck in a situation like that, it is so important to realize that you are not alone. No matter how much a manipulator or a predator makes you feel alone in that situation, you are not alone. There is help. We've talked about Snapchat being a different platform that the kids use, communication at their fingertips and those kinds of things. But there are places like Snapchat who work well with our police force, who work well with getting images that have maybe been used against children in ways like that. There is help out there. And so that's like, if anybody can hear the words that I say, parents, you don't know where to start. Kids, you don't know where to start. There is help. There is so much help.
And that's great advice. And what we would say for Dallas Christian parents, we have walked down this path with families over the years.
Yeah.
A call to us confidentially, where do we begin? We can put you in contact with a lot of resources that we can help from a counseling standpoint, from a legal standpoint. You mentioned Snapchat. Snapchat is one of the best, it's the best social media in terms of getting subpoenas to get the content off their servers. And so if there's an adult that's trafficking child pornography or predatory behaviors, Snapchat works very well with the law enforcement. So Officer McKay here at Dallas Christian has a lot of experience in terms of those investigations. We have contacts with Mesquite that can do some great forensic work if your student has been targeted. What message do we want to tell a teenager that might be dealing with something similar to this? One of the things that the experts are telling us at some of the conferences that I've attended in the last couple of years, first of all, if it's not someone that they know, if it's an entity online, there's a great chance it's an international entity. It's another country. And there's a great chance that it's just a scam. They don't have the ability to plaster your video on all the websites that you would, the people who know you. What they want is they want you to send money. And they're going to keep asking you to send money. It never stops, right? That's the scam. And it's scary. And so if nothing else, this could be a great talking point for parents that, hey, listen, if something like this comes along, another reason why, whatever you come and tell me, we're going to work through it together.
And you might have consequences.
It's sure.
You might lose access to
devices. You may lose
devices.
your phone. Yeah, that's right. But we're going to do this together. And then at that point, we can also help with some additional counseling in those areas. We have great resources there. So I would say, as we think about boys and at-risk behaviors, you mentioned the gaming sites, and I want to kind of pivot to that as we begin landing the plane on this conversation. So the gaming sites out there, in particular Roblox, it's gotten the most attention among Christian watchdog journalists, podcasters. All you have to do is Google predators and Roblox, and you'll have at your fingertips. You'll be disturbed, but you'll at your fingertips hours upon hours of podcasts. Folks that have spent way more time and energy on researching that than I have, but enough for us to say, hey, listen, parents, you have to instill the parent filter controls on those games.
Well, it seems innocent. It seems like, oh, this is a game that my kid wants to play. It seems it is marketed as a child game for that matter. And it just seems innocent. It just seems something that these kids can do and they can play on. But our goal is to tell you that these things are happening on it. So if your child is on these platforms or is playing these games, you might want to check and make sure that some of these controls are on and that these don't necessarily have access to your children.
Some practical things on the gaming component, because that's huge among our boys and our girls. I mean, our girls are they're playing Fortnite just as much as boys. So it's not just boys, but in particular for boys, parent filters are huge. Also, when it comes to the peer-to-peer platform, the active shooter games, kids want to put the earphones on and they want to just kind of close off to their environment, and they can have all kinds of strangers around them. Maybe sometimes you just say, hey, listen, we want the audio out, no earphones. You're going to hear profanity. That is ubiquitous. I mean, that's exactly what's going to happen on any gaming platform, whether it's
that you're allowing,
whether it's sports. If just assume if your student's on an online gaming platform where there's other people, there's going to be profanity, and that's going to come with that is going to come all sorts of other targeted attacks. And so sometimes it may just be a matter of, hey, I need to be aware of what you're hearing. And not because they're in trouble or they've done something wrong, but because this is what they're being exposed to. And then the Roblox in particular, there are very dark organizations out there that are targeting students in satanic ways, but also from a sexual standpoint, targeting students. And so just be aware. And again, I would just recommend use Google at your fingertips. Use ChatGPT now as your search engine. You'll get hours upon hours of content. So what we're just saying here is just, again, we got to be awake at the wheel when it comes to parenting, and assume that there might be some things that's going to happen. So let's try to get ahead of that.
Well, and social media platforms, gaming platforms, our phones, I mean, it feels like they update every 6 months. Something is different on there. We don't even know how to use our new phone app in our Apple things sometimes, and our voicemails and all these crazy things. Like, our systems are constantly updating. So we have to assume that the kids' systems are also updating, so that when you maybe 5 years ago, your child started to play Roblox or got Snapchat, you may have known everything about it. At that point, you decided, I'm going to know everything. I'm going to have all your passwords. I'm going to know exactly how this works. Well, 6 months later, it did an update, and another 6 months. So over time, these platforms have changed. And a lot of times what I see is that parents haven't gone back to realize, oh, I didn't even know you were able to do this anymore. I thought it was this way. And so even keeping yourself updated on what is available on these platforms, these gaming mechanisms, is just knowing, like, these are what's available. And that's what we're sitting here saying. You're in a different generation than I am. I'm in a different generation than the kids are. But this is still something that, like you said, is normal, but it is becoming common that we are going to face with our children, because they have access to things, and other people have access to those things as well.
Right.
And so you basically, I feel like what you're saying is just be very, very mindful that these things are even available to our kids. Not necessarily that it is happening to your family, but it could be.
Sure.
It could be.
Right. Let's, in conclusion, let's give some practical advice. I have a list of some things. I know you have a list of some things. Some of it may be a bit redundant. We've mentioned already, but I want to at least double click on some very practical tips for you to consider at home. Again, your parenting style is your parenting style. Some of these may work for your family, may not, but at least consider.
Yeah.
And you may have some ideas that we haven't mentioned that is worth us sharing with the community as well. And so you can always email those to us if those are working really well for you, or if there's some technologies that you have come across, you can share those with us as well. But a couple things on my list that I think is just good advice as it relates to when you introduce your student to technology, in particular the phone, and they start entering the social media world. The first thing is strongly consider the age in which you want your student to begin, joining social media platforms. That's going to be different for different people. I can tell you there's a bit of a standard that's coming out now with a lot of the people that I read, and that standard is social media should not be introduced before 9th grade. Okay. If you do introduce social media before 9th grade, one of the parents should probably be either controlling that to where they can access that Instagram. I would not introduce Snapchat at all, probably before high school, but Instagram for sure. If that's your entree into social media, make sure there's a parent that has the past content. Make sure you're able to kind of see exactly what your student's seeing, help control who they're going to allow as followers. Make it private first and foremost. And then also be aware of what content's being shared. And so as the parent, use your social media, use your Instagram account to follow your student so you see what's being posted. And then have the very honest, very, wise conversation with your student about burner accounts or spam accounts. Those things are going to pop up, and next thing you know, you think your student only has one Instagram account. Really, they may have multiple, and there's different audiences in those. And so I think that's just going to be a level of, the expression, trust but verify. So again, those just how it is. The second thing I would say is this was always something that I read about. And as a family, I don't know that we did a great job with this with our girls and their cell phones. I think we should have. And I think in hindsight, I wish we would have to some extent. But give your students the break on the cell phone at night when they go up to their room and they go to sleep. Because if that phone is next to their bed, what's going to happen, and this is the term now, is doom scrolling. Mm-hmm. There's actually a podcast called Doom Scroll, but they're going to doom scroll. They're going to infinitely scroll on their phones. And the phone is going to become the very thing that's going to keep them awake. They're not going to be able to sleep well. the light from the phone is going to keep your brain awake. There's just all sorts of things, practical things that's not going to be great. But in particular, they're not going to be able to turn their brain off because the scroll is addictive. And they're going to keep scrolling, and they're going to keep scrolling. And next thing you know, an hour, 3 hours have gone by. And so if you haven't already said, hey, listen, when it's around bedtime, phones stay downstairs, okay? Phones stay in a basket downstairs. You don't need your phone at 1 o'clock in the morning. Now, for some, that's going to create anxiety, right? And so when students are separated from their phone, their anxiety is going to go higher. The other thing I would add to that component is from time to time, do a check on their screen time, right? Make sure they haven't turned that off on their settings. You may just do a quick audit on your student's screen time and realize you've spent 40 hours on your phone in the last 3 days.
Yeah.
Okay, that's going to trigger a different conversation with your student on how we're going to manage that. So I think be aware of sort of on the back end ways and the metrics you can see exactly the time that your student's spending on their device. And then the last thing I would say, at some point, de-shame the conversation so that it might be awkward. It may not be the best conversation for a dad to have with the daughter. Maybe it's a mom-daughter. Maybe it's a father-son. Whatever your dynamic is at home. But the moment in which you can now recognize and just put it out on the table, hey, listen, this is normal behavior. Okay, it is not atypical that someone's going to ask you for images, or that you might think about sending an image, and it may not be a really bad image, but this is going to happen, or you're going to receive an invitation to look at an image, or an image is going to be sent to you. The moment in which you can kind of de-shame that and recognize that that's going to be a talking point, I think is going to go a long way, and I think that's going to transition into bigger conversations on, what does our relationship need to look like if you're a 14-year-old with a boyfriend or girlfriend. And what do those ground rules look like? So I think those tips are things that I would consider. And again, we'll share some more advice with you in terms of some of the resources that we've used in preparation for this podcast as well. What tips and advice do you have for parents before we conclude?
I feel like I have several.
Okay, let's go.
My first one, the kids are going to hate this, and they're all going to probably give me a big headache in the hallway when I say it. But be in your kids' business. Just be in the know of what is happening. You paid for that phone. You have every right to that phone. And I know there is part of, giving your kids independence. It is like trying to foster this and, I can't do that because that's their privacy. They're still living underneath your roof. That is still a time for guidance. And so I do think that you can be involved without causing shame or causing any of these extra anxieties. But also, if you feel like something's up, you don't have to draw that line and say, oh, well, that's just my kids. That's not mine. If you're worried or you want to be involved and no one ever wanted distance from their family, right? We are in this bubble of busyness that all of us live in. And sometimes I do think that because of the busyness, we do get separation. So in saying that, have those conversations at home. Have the family reset, put everybody's phones to the side and look at everybody and say, I don't know what you did today. I don't know who your friends are. I don't know this, but I want to. We didn't imagine getting married and having children and thinking, well, we're all going to grow apart and their life is going to be their life and our life is going to be ours. So yes, we're in this conversation about things that could happen to them and things that they're exposed about. But this also goes to their friendships. This can go to bullying, when kids don't feel safe and comfortable to talk about it because they're like, well, either my parents don't want to know about my life or we're too busy to know about it. Sometimes I think kids just need to hear, like, I'm still interested. I'm still mom. I still love you outside of your academics and all of these other things. Have dinner together, have breakfast together, open up these doors, because communication doesn't just come from words being spoken to each other, but it's through the whole relationship and how we can manage that together.
Good advice. I like it. What else?
So yeah, be in your kids' business and talk to them.
Yeah.
I also think just educating yourself, slowing down our lives and our priorities to make sure that we're also taking care of our families. Biblically, scripture says to fill yourself with holiness. And that's kind of what you put in, basically on a blatant level. What you put in is what you're going to put out. If these kids are doom scrolling at night, and I can say, we are not perfect in this. I know for sure that I have TikTok, I have Facebook, I have other things. And sometimes when I am just done with the world, it's a way to escape. Kids are never escaping. They are constantly in this space. They don't know how to escape. So when we are looking at this, educate yourself on what these platforms even offer. If you're seeing TikToks and Facebook posts and things that you don't like, you can imagine that these things are also happening to your children. And I think that most of us as parents, as friends, as, just colleagues with each other even, trying to live life together, we need that parental support. Ask your other friends, what are you doing in your household? Are my kids going to like that? You might hear kicking and screaming after this podcast and when you change some dynamics in your family home. But it's ultimately for the better. We're trying to have our kids succeed, have our family succeed, have a relationship that we can look at when they go to college and say, I know they're going to call. Whenever they're often in their marriage with their family, and you can think, they are going to implement healthy communication and strong things because I did it.
I like that. So really, they're developing habits.
Yeah, you're creating habits.
Take them lifelong habits. So good. What else?
Don't completely take everything away.
Got it. Okay. This
podcast and this conversation in general is not to instill fear in families or instill fear in kids.
Right.
We are trying to just say, so, I can kind of relate this to Target, all the shopping things. But when I go to Target and I'm in the parking lot alone and I don't have anybody with me, I'm aware of my surroundings because I know that there is a potential that anybody at any point in time, I could be at Target, I could be at North Park, I could be anywhere, that any point in time, I'm now a vulnerable person. I can have my things taken from me. I can have my car taken from me, but I'm at least aware of my surroundings. When you understand what's happening in life and you're creating these habits to know that, okay, I could be in a situation where this is not good, or I at least can recognize that this is not bad. You have to create those habits along the way that can even recognize these kinds of things. So when you're building these things and these habits with these kids, it's saying, hey, you really are valued, and you are valued because you are the Lord's and you are made in the Lord's image, not because of likes. They might find their way over to, I'm valued because of likes, but they need to also remember those habits that you instilled that matched with, I am actually not valued by my likes or by these things. I am worth not being able to have to suppress my own feelings and hide everything. I have a voice. I am able to speak up about this because this is not something that I liked. Mm-hmm. So instilling those habits along the way and reassurance of coaching and teaching. I mean, we teach the kids how to drive. We have to teach them how to navigate social media and their phones. We have to continue to pour ourselves into them instead of separate ourselves away from them.
This has been a great conversation. It's one that we could spend hours talking about.
And we're not perfect.
Not at all.
In this.
And we don't have all the answers, and but I do appreciate that you're in tune with this, Chelsea. I appreciate that for our students that we have opportunities built in, that whether it's through small group, whether it's through their Bible classes, whether it's through their other classes with their teachers, coaches. Hopefully we're building that conduit where students can share what's going on. And then ultimately, we don't do this in isolation of our families, right? So we're going to walk alongside our parents and help steer them toward resources if necessary. The reality is, growing up, it's just tough.
Well, and I think, too, if you're a student that's listening to this or a family, students, find an adult you trust. If you don't have that open communication with your parents just yet, that doesn't mean that it can't happen, but if it's just not there yet, but you are in a situation, find a trusted adult. I'm here on campus, but I may not be everybody's person that they immediately trust. Sure. You may have a history teacher or a math teacher or somebody that you trust. Find a trusted adult and just tell them what's going on, because you cannot carry this burden alone, is what I would tell all the kids. You can't carry the burden alone, and you shouldn't have to. Right. And this isn't everything. It is such a small part of your life that you are learning about, that you will make mistakes in, but it's okay. We can navigate that, and that you are just so important that people want to navigate that with you.
That's a great way. I think it's a great way to end the podcast. Thank you. If you've taken time to watch this, thank you. We'll be putting out some additional podcast episodes in the next couple of months. Be on the lookout for those. If there's any comments or questions you have with any content we shared, feel free to email me. You can email me at cking@dallaschristian.com. I can share that with Ms. Burkham. Also, her email address is listed on our website as well, cburkham@dallaschristian.com. If there's anything that we can do further to help you or your family, let us know. Again, thank you for taking time to watch this episode.